presenting their call story. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Oscar Osario. Oscar, take us away.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. It can be confusing, right? Because we use our two last names. So my first last name is Guana, as you can read in my small square there. Thank you very much, all of you, for being here. I will just start because I have to say my presentation, the title of my presentation is different. This is what I want to talk about to you this morning, called to peace building through rural evangelical churches in Colombia. This is how I would like to share about what I understand is my calling in life right now. But to start, I would like to introduce you to the Colombian context and the conflict in Colombia. So we are a highly centralized country. Our capital city is Bogota, where I am right now, and I will tell you a little bit more about that. Around 70% of the Colombian population is urban. And in these red circles, you will see the 5 biggest Colombian cities and regions that have defined in history what it is to be Colombian, right? So you can see that, I don't know, maybe 80% and 70% of our geography is out of those circles, right? So that's why Colombian conflict is a rural conflict, because those neglected far regions are yeah, that what I mean. Those regions are neglected. The government is not present to guarantee the rights of the Colombian population in those areas, outside of those circles. So our development model favors private and foreign capital. And this situation has given place to the guerrillas on one hand, the rise of drug trafficking, extreme right-wing paramilitary groups as a response to the guerrillas, and a huge political corruption. And as I have told you, in rural, far, remote areas, all these problems are stronger. So all of this context was for me just part of some distant narrative that I didn't know, because as part being born and raised in Bogota, I all our conflict, our context was just something I heard about through the news, through mass media. It was not something I got to know in personally, you know. So in any case, I grew up in close contact with the countryside because my family has a farm, and that's why I went to the university to study agronomy. This is kind of agriculture. So getting to know the reality of agriculture in the rural world from an academic perspective, and at my university, which is the Universidad Nacional de Colombia, I grew more and more conscious of the reality of our inequality and everything. And as you can see in these pictures, the Che Guevara is one of the major figures in our University. And the second picture you see in the bottom, that's Camilo Torres. So if you know something about these two people, you will know that my university is a very critic university towards the um, capitalist model and the influence of the US in our countries in Latin America. So it is not a communist university or something like that, no, but there's this influence, right? So I was educated in this university and started to become aware of my context and love my context, my country, my culture. A little bit kind of parallel to that, I joined this Christian student fellowship, which is Unidad Cristiana Universitaria. You see the logo, the red logo there. Um, because I became a Christian, an evangelical Christian, when I started my undergrad education. So parallel to that, I joined this student fellowship, and I started to know the integral mission. This is one of the most important evangelical theological contributions to the world of the 20th century. And from Latin America, we have these are the main authors and thinkers and theologians from this current. René Padilla, Samuel Escobar, Pedro Arana, some others. And the focus of this way of thinking, church and Christian mission, is to promote the holistic and structural aspect of Christian mission. So the integral mission thinks that Christian mission must transform all the dimensions of human life, present earthly needs as well as eternal salvation. And you can feel small influence of liberation theology there, because it favors the poor. So I started to learn how to read the Bible from the perspective of the oppressed, of the poor. And when you do that, your whole reading of the Bible shifts. So you learn how to read the words of Jesus, such as this one I have here. Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. When you learn about the context of Jesus, the context of the early church, you can learn that their context was not so different from our context. So in terms of having an empire that was ruling over the lives of people with violence, so when you I read I learned to read the Bible from that perspective, and that changed my whole um, way of understanding the Bible, my context. So these two influences, my university and this student fellowship, allowed me to grow theologically, personally, in leadership. Um, and then after my undergrad and after 9 years in the student fellowship, I worked for this Colombian NGO or ministry called Visión Agape, which is affiliated to Open Doors International, which works with persecuted Christians around the world. And I worked there for 4 years, coordinating the Bible training projects. And I finally got to know the country. This work allowed me to go all around the country to the farthest um, regions, and to know rural, peasant, native, indigenous churches, which, by the way, were founded by U.S. and European missionaries around the early to mid 20th century. And I got to know their experiences dealing with violent armed actors firsthand. So I chose this picture because this reflects the reality of the Colombian evangelical church facing the violent armed actors. They have their weapons, they have their physical strength, and the Colombian church is like these little girls there, like uh, innocent somehow, uh, weak, you know, but I learned that the Colombian church has so much potential and strength. So uh, I learned that rural evangelical churches in Colombia have built peace for decades. Uh, and I emphasize that I'm talking about the rural churches because it's a different story with urban mega churches. For them, uh, the Colombian conflict, the realities of injustice and everything are so far away still. And the urban churches in general are under the influence of political discourse, and they are pretty much polarized, you know. So I would like to emphasize that rural evangelical churches in Colombia are nonviolent, radically nonviolent, even though they do not call it like that. They are unconsciously nonviolent. And Christians, evangelical Christians in the countryside in Colombia have high moral standards. They outstand because of that. So the way they understand the guerrillas is they are evil because they are atheist, materialistic. They are involved with witchcraft. Far right paramilitaries, it's kind of the same story. They are cruel. Um, all of the armed actors are uh, linked somehow to witchcraft here in Colombia. Uh, so evangelicals in Colombia do not agree with any of these groups. Uh, Apart from that, those two groups are involved in drug trafficking, and the army, the legal armed group, is not so much of an ally in general. If you have heard about the Colombian news these days, there are several cases of rapings from army soldiers. I mean, against little indigenous girls. It's crazy. So there's an influence of the U.S. war against drugs and anti-communism in the thought of these churches. Um, so there's a spiritual warfare. Churches use preaching, prayer, fasting, anointing, vigils, evangelization, and anyone can find a place in these churches. Even victims of this conflict and former perpetrators can join together to praise the Lord. Uh, so I could learn this from my experience. Pastors and churches are uh, community leaders. and they perform many um, functions beyond preaching, and they are key social actors, even though they are victims themselves. So, with all this background, finally, me and my wife, we landed in Boston in BU School of Theology. We are in the global and community engagement track. We are attracted by the religion and conflict transformation program. We are also on the Raíces Latinas program. And we are learning, we are speaking up, we're telling what we know, what we have learned, and we're dreaming with conducting research and social intervention for peace building and social justice here in our country, in Latin America. Um, so far, the Lord has been very good with us, and we are building up our dream. So that's what I wanted to share with you all this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Oscar. It has been a pleasure listening to you. Thank you for sharing about your upbringing, about your ministry, and the things that you and your wife are doing now. For those that tuned in last Wednesday, his wife Laura presented a very awesome paper. So I would invite you to check the video of that out on the website. So, Oscar, you have about 30 seconds left before we head into worship. Any final words for the congregation today?
Thank you. Maybe just ask you the favor and recommend you all to get to know what's going on in Latin America, in Colombia. Get to know, read about our news, what's going on every day here, um, because interesting things are happening here, and as well, the hard things that we live here have a lot to do with the influence of the U.S. in the U.S. church as well. So,
Absolutely.
just that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. We appreciate that.